The music was a dull throb against my ribs, a stranger's heartbeat in a room full of them. I was nursing a glass of club soda, watching the light catch the dust motes dancing in the air when a hand landed on my arm. It was Clara. Her eyes, usually the color of a stormy sea, were wide with a specific kind of panic I was just starting to learn. She pulled me from my corner, her fingers digging into my bicep. Before I could ask what was wrong, a man with a smile too white for his face was standing in front of us. "Clara, darling," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I didn't think you'd make it, and you didn't mention you were bringing a guest." Clara's grip tightened on my arm. She gave me a look that screamed 1,000 things, none of them good. Then she turned back to him, her own smile a fragile, beautiful weapon. "Julian," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "Of course I made it. It's my sister's wedding. And this is my plus one. Now." She squeezed my arm, a frantic signal in a language we hadn't invented yet. I nodded at Julian, a simple, non-committal gesture. He looked me up and down, a flicker of something ugly in his eyes before the perfect smile snapped back into place. He was assessing me. A threat? A nuisance? A nobody? He seemed to settle on the last one. "A pleasure," Julian said, the words holding no pleasure at all. He turned his attention back to Clara, dismissing me completely. "We need to talk about the arrangements for Maya later. Your little stunt with the trust isn't going to work." Clara's spine went rigid. She didn't look at me, but I felt the tremor run through her. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear, her lips brushing the shell of it as she whispered 5 words that changed everything. "Don't break character. Please, Leo." And that is how I, the building superintendent who hadn't been on a date in 3 years, found myself pretending to be the devoted boyfriend of the woman from apartment 4B at her sister's wedding. That is how I met my wife. Let me back up. My name is Leo. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the superintendent of a mid-rise apartment building in a city that never stops moving, even when you wish it would. For a long time, I had stopped moving with it. I was a ghost in the machine of my own life. I existed in the building's basement, a world of pipes and wires and concrete dust. I fixed leaks, I snaked drains, I changed light bulbs in the hallways that other people walked down on their way to their real lives. I was good at it. Things made sense. A broken faucet has a cause and an effect. You replace the washer, you tighten the fitting, and the dripping stops. People weren't like that. I hadn't always been this way. Switched off. Numb. The switch flipped 5 years ago, the day I buried my father. He was a mechanic, a man whose hands were a roadmap of grease and scars and quiet competence. He could listen to an engine and know its heart, know its pain. He taught me how to fix things. Not just cars, but anything that was broken. He taught me patience. He also taught me other things in his quiet way. Little bits of wisdom that didn't make much sense until long after he was gone. "You see a wild thing, Leo," he told me once, watching a stray cat in our yard that wouldn't come near. A horse, a dog, even a person with a bit of wildness in their eyes. You don't break its spirit to make it trust you. That's not trust. That's just breaking something. You earn it. Quietly. You just show up, be steady, and let it decide you're safe. After he died, the world lost its color. The grief was a heavy coat I couldn't take off. It wasn't a loud, dramatic pain. It was a dull, constant weight. A silence where his voice used to be. My mom had passed years before, so it was just me. The house we'd lived in felt too big, too quiet. So I sold it and took the job at the apartment building. A small, self-contained world in a basement apartment. It was perfect. I stopped wanting things. I stopped feeling things. I ate, I slept, I worked. I was a well-maintained machine, running on fumes. I was convinced I was the kind of person who doesn't get a family, who doesn't get a happy ending. I'd had my share and it was gone. That was the story I told myself. And for 5 years, I believed it. Then Clara moved into 4B. I knew she was trouble from day one. Not real trouble, but the kind that disrupts a quiet, orderly existence. Her moving truck blocked the alley. Her music was a little too loud. She submitted maintenance requests for things that weren't broken, like a wobbly doorknob that was perfectly firm or a strange humming from the radiator in the middle of July. I think she was just lonely. I'd go up there, my toolbox in hand, and she'd talk at me while I pretended to inspect the offending appliance. She'd tell me about her job as a freelance graphic designer, about her younger sister Maya, about the ridiculous price of avocados. I was a captive audience, a piece of the building's infrastructure she could talk to. I'd grunt in response, tighten a screw that didn't need tightening, and leave. The other tenants whispered about her. They said she was flighty, unstable, argumentative. I saw the eviction notices from her previous apartment that her ex-boyfriend, Julian, had so helpfully forwarded to the management company. They painted a picture of a difficult person. But I never saw that. I saw tired eyes. I saw a tension in her shoulders that never seemed to leave. I saw a woman who was fighting a war no one else could see. One Tuesday night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from 4B. My kitchen sink is making a sound like a dying whale. Can you please come? It's an emergency. I sighed, pulled on my boots, and grabbed my tools. A dying whale was probably just a bit of air in the pipes. When she opened the door, she wasn't wearing her usual frantic energy. She was pale, and she'd been crying. The apartment, usually a state of organized chaos, was immaculate. There were 2 suitcases by the door. The sink isn't broken, is it? I asked, my voice flat. She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. No, I am sorry. I needed to ask someone for help, and you were the only person I could think of. I waited. In my line of work, you learn to wait. People will eventually tell you what's really broken. My sister, Maya, she's getting married this weekend, Clara began, her voice trembling. It's supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She has a developmental disability. Nothing severe, but she's gentle. She trusts people too easily. She's the best person I know, Leo. I nodded, leaning against the doorframe. My ex-boyfriend, Julian, is the groom's best man, she continued, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. When we were together, he was charming. Everyone loved him. But behind closed doors, he was controlling. He needs to have power over people. She took a shaky breath. After I left him, he shifted his focus. He wormed his way into my family's life. He convinced my parents that I was unstable. He used my grief over my own failed business, which he helped sabotage, as proof that I was reckless. Now, he's trying to do the same to Maya. The pieces started to click into place. The whispers from the tenants. The forwarded notices. Julian was building a narrative. He's convinced my parents that Maya can't handle her own affairs, that she needs a conservator to manage her inheritance from our grandmother. And he has graciously offered to be that conservator, she said, the sarcasm sharp and painful. He's using this wedding as his stage. He's going to make a scene, try to provoke me, do anything to prove to everyone that I'm the crazy, unreliable sister, and he's the stable, heroic figure who has to step in and save poor, simple Maya. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. This was the real leak, the one a wrench couldn't fix. The world thinks I'm the villain, she whispered. My own parents are starting to believe it. They think I'm jealous of my sister's happiness. They don't see that I'm just trying to protect her from him. He wants to isolate her, control her money, and trap her in a life where she's completely dependent on him. What do you need? I asked. The words came out before I could stop them. It was the first time in 5 years I had asked anyone that question. Her plan was both desperate and absurdly simple. I need a boyfriend, she said, just for the weekend. I need someone to stand next to me and look stable, normal. I need someone to prove I'm not the chaotic mess he's painted me as. Someone to be my +1. If I show up with a solid, dependable guy, it chips away at his story. It shows I moved on, that I'm fine. She saw the doubt in my eyes. I'll pay you, she said quickly. $500, $1,000, whatever you want, just to come with me, to smile and nod and hold my hand and not let him get to me. I thought about my quiet basement apartment, about the silence, about the gray, orderly days stretching out in front of me, one after the other, all the same. I thought about the weight in my chest that had become a permanent part of me. I thought about my dad, about a wild thing with fear in its eyes. You don't break it. You earn its trust. You just show up. I don't want your money, I said, but I have a suit. I'll go, The relief that washed over her face was like watching the sun rise. It was the first truly beautiful thing I had seen in a very long time. And so, my silent, gray world was suddenly filled with color. The color of bridesmaid dresses, of floral arrangements, of Clara's frantic, handwritten notes. We spent the next 2 days inventing a life together. Okay, so how did we meet? She asked, pacing her living room while I sat on her sofa, feeling like an alien on a strange planet. You lived in my building, I said. It's the truth. Easiest to remember. No, that's not romantic enough, she insisted. Julian deals in narratives. We need a better story, something that makes us look solid, inevitable. So we invented. We met at a farmer's market. I was admiring the heirloom tomatoes. She was trying to wrangle an armful of sunflowers. She bumped into me. Sunflowers went flying. It was clumsy and charming. A romantic comedy meet-cute. Our first date was at a terrible Italian restaurant with a surly waiter and amazing pasta. We laughed about it for hours. I was a superintendent, yes, but I was also restoring a vintage motorcycle in my spare time. It was my passion project. This detail was true, and it made me feel a little less like a complete fraud. She told me I loved the way she hummed when she was concentrating on a design. I told her she loved that I could fix anything. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing. We started actually talking. She told me about Maya, about how, when they were kids, Clara would read her stories every night, changing her voice for all the characters. She told me how Maya could see patterns in the world that no one else could, how she could create the most intricate, beautiful drawings. She wasn't just a victim to be protected. She was a whole, vibrant person Clara adored. I told her about my dad. I told her about his hands, how they could be so strong and yet so gentle. I told her about the smell of his workshop, a mix of oil and steel and sawdust. It was more than I had said about him to anyone since the funeral. Talking about him felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. The night before we were due to leave for the wedding venue, a hotel 2 hours out of the city, she was a nervous wreck. She was on a video call, and I was in her kitchen pretending to fix the handle on her refrigerator door, which was, of course, not broken. I could hear her voice, soft and reassuring. No, sweetie, of course you're not bothering me. Yes, I packed the blue one. And the silver shoes. I know they're your favorite. There was a pause. He's right here. Do you want to say hi? My heart hammered against my ribs. She turned the phone towards me. On the screen was a young woman with Clara's eyes and a smile that could power a small city. Maya, this is Leo, Clara said, her voice full of a warmth I'd never heard before. Leo, this is my amazing sister, Maya. Leo, Maya said, her voice bright and cheerful. Clara says you can fix anything. Can you fix my wobbly desk chair? It squeaks when I draw. I found myself smiling. A real smile. It felt rusty. I can definitely take a look at that, I said. He's very handsome, Clara, Maya said, not in a whisper. He has kind eyes. Clara blushed, a lovely deep crimson that spread across her cheeks. I watched them talk for another 10 minutes. I saw the way Clara's entire being softened when she looked at her sister. I saw the fierce, unconditional love there. The easy banter, the inside jokes, the deep, unshakable bond. This wasn't the flighty, unstable woman from the tenant gossip. This wasn't the difficult person Julian described. This was a warrior. She was sacrificing her reputation, her relationship with her parents, her own peace of mind, all to protect this bright, beautiful soul on the other end of the screen. That was the moment of seeing. It was the moment I stopped pretending this was a job. It was the moment I decided I would do anything to help her. I wasn't just showing up anymore. I was standing with her. The first challenge came at the rehearsal dinner. It was held in a private room at a steakhouse, all dark wood and low lighting. We walked in, and I could feel every eye in the room land on us. On me. Julian was there, of course, standing next to the groom, holding court. He saw us, and his smile tightened just a fraction of an inch. He made his way over, a shark gliding through friendly waters. Clara, Leo, he said, his voice booming for the benefit of those around us. So glad you can make it. Leo, I didn't get a chance to ask last night. What is it you do? It was a test. He expected me to have some high-powered, impressive job. I'm a building superintendent, I said calmly, taking a sip of my water. I felt Clara tense beside me. Julian's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Oh, how practical. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. It is, I agreed, meeting his gaze. Things break. I fix them. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze with a quiet steadiness. He was used to people who postured, who fought back, who gave him drama to feed on. He didn't know what to do with calm. He didn't know what to do with someone who wasn't trying to impress him. He faltered, the charming mask slipping for a second. He turned and walked away. Later, Clara pulled me aside near the coat check. Thank you, she whispered, for not rising to his bait. He wanted to fight, I said. I'm not a fighter. What are you then? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I thought for a moment. I'm a fixer, and I realized, with a jolt that went straight through me, that I wasn't just talking about pipes anymore. The wedding day arrived, a swirl of white tulle and nervous energy. I stood in the back during the ceremony, watching Clara watch Maya. She wasn't a bridesmaid. Julian had seen to that, convincing the family it would be too much stress for her. So she sat in the front row, a silent guardian, and when Maya said, I do, a single, perfect tear rolled down Clara's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of profound, heartbreaking love. Then came the reception. The music, the food, the stilted conversations with relatives who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I played my part. I was Leo, the steady boyfriend. I held Clara's hand. I got her a glass of champagne. I listened while her aunt explained the entire history of a painful bunion. And then came the toasts. The groom gave a sweet, rambling speech. The maid of honor told a funny story from college. And then Julian took the microphone. He started out perfectly, charming, witty, full of praise for the happy couple. But then he turned his attention to Clara. And to my dear friend Clara, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Maya's protector, her champion. We all know how much you've been through, Clara. How deeply you feel things. How passionately you throw yourself into causes. The room was silent. I could feel the shift. He was painting her as unstable, right here, in front of everyone. We all worry about you, he continued, looking directly at her parents, who were watching with concerned expressions. And we are all so glad to see that you have someone now. He gestured vaguely at me. Someone to ground you, to keep you from flying too close to the sun. We are all just hoping that this time, for Maya's sake, you can keep it together. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, delivered with a smile. He had called her crazy without using the word. He had planted the seed of doubt in everyone's mind. Clara was white as a sheet, her knuckles bloodless where she gripped her wine glass. I felt a cold, quiet rage build inside me. Not a hot, explosive anger, but something deep and steady. He was trying to break her, right here, in public. My father's voice echoed in my head. You don't break a wild thing. You earn its trust. Fighting him on his own terms would be a mistake. A loud speech, an angry denial, that would only prove his point. It would be exactly the drama he wanted. I had to do something else. Just then, the projector for the wedding slideshow flickered and died. The screen went black. A murmur went through the crowd. The wedding planner rushed over, tapping at the laptop, looking flustered. This was my chance. I stood up. Excuse me, I said to Clara, and walked over to the table. What's the problem? I asked the planner, my voice low and calm. I don't know. It was just working. The cable, maybe, she stammered. I knelt down, my suit jacket pulling tight across my shoulders. I looked at the tangle of wires behind the table. It was a simple fix. The HDMI cable had been kicked loose from the adapter. I plugged it back in, secured it, and then traced the power cord. It was plugged into a multi-strip that had been switched off. I flicked it on. The projector whirred to life. An image of Maya and her new husband filled the screen. The room applauded lightly. The planner looked at me with pure, unadulterated gratitude. I walked back to my seat. I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't raised my voice. I had just quietly and competently fixed a problem. In a room full of chaos, I had been a point of calm. I saw Clara's parents look at me with a new expression. Not suspicion, respect. But Julian wasn't done. As the slideshow ended and the DJ started a slow song, he walked over to our table. "Well done," he sneered under his breath. "The handyman saves the day." Very on brand. He turned to Clara. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A power play. Clara looked trapped. To refuse would be a scene. To accept would be a surrender. This was it. The moment. I stood up and held out my hand to her. I didn't even look at Julian. My entire focus was on her. "I believe this is our dance," I said, my voice steady. She looked from my outstretched hand to my eyes. In them, she didn't see a fake boyfriend playing a role. She saw me. Lau, the fixer, the man who had listened, the man who had shown up. She placed her hand in mine. It was cold, but it fit perfectly. I led her to the dance floor, leaving Julian standing there, alone and sputtering. We moved to the center of the floor. I put one hand on her waist, and she rested her head against my shoulder. We didn't talk. We just swayed to the music. I wasn't a great dancer, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the solid feel of her in my arms. I was a shield, an anchor. I had used my quietness, my steadiness, as a weapon against his noise. I hadn't broken his narrative with force. I was earning the trust of everyone in that room by simply being who I was. A calm, capable man who clearly cared for this woman. The narrative was cracking. Julian's carefully constructed story was falling apart, not with a bang, but with a quiet, simple dance. I could feel the tension drain out of her. Her body relaxed against mine. She wasn't just the woman from 4B anymore. She was Clara. And in that moment, under the dim lights of a stranger's wedding, I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I was falling in love with her. We left the wedding early. We didn't say much on the drive back to the city. The silence wasn't empty like the silence in my basement apartment. It was full of everything that had happened, and everything that was about to. I walked her to her door, the door of apartment 4B. This was where the story was supposed to end. The job was over. The pretense was done. I should have said good night, gone back to my basement, and switched the world off again. The thought was unbearable. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice soft. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "For everything. I'll get you that money I promised." "I told you I don't want any money, Clara," I said. "Then what do you want?" she whispered, finally looking up at me. There it was. The question. For 5 years, I hadn't wanted anything. Now I wanted everything. "I don't want to go back to the basement," I said, the words feeling clumsy and new. "This isn't pretend for me anymore. I don't know what it is for you, but for me, it's real." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of panic or sadness. There was something else. "It's real for me, too," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. And she closed the small distance between us and kissed me. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss. It was gentle and hesitant and real. It was the sound of a lock clicking open. A week later, Clara got a call from her sister. Maya, empowered by seeing Clara with someone so steady, and having had her own suspicions about Julian all along, had finally stood up to him. She had recorded a conversation where he admitted his plan to control her finances. She played it for her parents. The truth, when it finally comes out, is often quieter than the lie it replaces. There was no big confrontation. Julian was quietly and firmly excised from their lives. Clara's parents called her, their voices full of an apology that was 5 years overdue. She had been vindicated, not because she screamed louder, but because the truth had a weight of its own. The relationship I had with Clara grew in the quiet spaces. At 1 month, she brought a small, potted plant down to my basement apartment. "It needs more light," I told her. "So does this place," she replied, and set on my windowsill. At 2 months, I cleared a shelf for her in my medicine cabinet. It was a bigger commitment than the wedding. At 6 months, we were sitting on her sofa, the one where we had invented our fake life. She was sketching in a notebook, humming that little tune she did when she was concentrating. I was rereading an old paperback of my dad's. It was a comfortable, easy silence. I looked at her, at the way the lamplight caught the stray hairs around her face, at the focused intensity in her eyes. I couldn't imagine my life without her in it. The silence before her had been empty. This silence was full. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small brass washer. It was from a faucet I had fixed for her a few weeks prior. I had polished it until it shone. "Clara," I said. She looked up. I held out the washer. "This is just a stand-in," I said, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. "Until I can get you a real one. But I don't want to be your pretend anything ever again. I want to be your real husband. Will you marry me?" Her smile was the sunrise I had seen that first night in her apartment. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." She wore that washer on a chain around her neck until we replaced it with a simple silver band. It's funny, isn't it? How a life can pivot on a single moment, on a single choice. For years, I thought my story was over. I was the epilogue, the quiet caretaker of other people's lives. I thought I was showing up to that wedding to save her, to be her hero, her protector. But that was never the truth. The truth is, I was the one who needed saving. I was a ghost, haunting the hallways of my own life. I was a machine, going through the motions. I had sealed myself in a tomb of grief and called it a quiet life. I had stopped living. I had just been existing. Clara, with her dying wail sink and her chaotic energy and her desperate, crazy plan, she didn't need a hero. She was already a hero. She was fighting for her sister with everything she had. What she needed was a witness. Someone to see her, truly see her, for the warrior she was. By asking for my help, she forced me to open the door to my own basement tomb. She pulled me out into the light. She made me talk. She made me feel. She needed me to be steady. And in becoming steady for her, I found my own footing again. I thought I was the fixer, but she was the one who fixed me. She saw something in the quiet, shut-down man in the basement that no one else did, that even I had forgotten was there. She trusted me with her biggest battle, and in doing so, she taught me how to trust myself again. My dad's words come back to me all the time now. You don't break a wild thing to make it trust you. You earn it. He was talking about horses and cats, sure, but he was also talking about people. He was talking about Clara with her fierce spirit that the world tried to label as instability. And he was talking about me, too, about the grief that had made me wild and unreachable. Clara didn't try to break my sadness. She didn't try to force me to be happy. She just showed up. She sat with me in the quiet. She brought a small green plant into my gray world and trusted that, in time, I would find the light on my own. She earned my trust, and in doing so, she saved my life. She didn't just give me a new chapter. She was a whole new book, the one I was always meant to live. And all I had to do was be brave enough to turn the first page.